So maybe he doesn't need a chief of staff. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, presidential chief of staff John Kelly's stepping down at the end of this year, and there is a lot of buzz about who the president is going to pick to replace him. Vice President Pence's chief of staff was briefly in the running, and as it turns out, not only is he not going to accept that job, which he had apparently been lobbying for, but he's actually leaving Pence's staff as well. The latest talk I saw before we recorded this episode is that conservative Congressman Mark Meadows may be under consideration. But I guess, Bill, I have a broader question for you, and that is, if a Pentagon general could not effectively manage the office of the presidency of the United States, should there even be a chief of staff? Or let me start it that way. Should there even be a chief of staff when you've got a President Trump as president?
Well, I mean, needless to say, I think there needs to be a chief of staff. The minutia of that office are just so many, just legion of little tiny things that have to happen all the time, and there's no way the president can look at bigger issues and manage those little issues, and they're still relatively big issues, the little ones that the chief of staff has to deal with. So yes, I think obviously he needs a chief of staff, and I agree with you that if I think we're left with Mattis. I think that's the only guy left, who's tough enough to pull this off. But having a General Mattis as Secretary of Defense alone is worth any. The Trump administration making him SecDef alone was enough reason to vote for Donald Trump for me.
So let's say the president calls you tonight. I know he likes to reach out to people and get their opinions. So he calls you tonight and he says, Bill, I'm not going to ask you who I should pick for chief of staff, but just kind of tell me, what should I be looking for in a chief of staff for my administration?
I suspect if I really had to take a serious shot at it, I would tell Donald Trump, find somebody who agrees with you on just about everything. Because it appears that Donald Trump is going to do what he wants to do anyway. And when I say agrees with you on just about everything, I mean in terms of political direction. I don't mean find somebody who's willing to lie, cheat, or steal or anything like that. I'm just saying find somebody who really is on board with the direction that you want to go. There's been an awful lot of turnover in the Trump White House. There's no question about that. Looks like chaotic on the outside. Maybe it is chaotic on the inside. But I think the bigger issue is, where is it that Donald Trump wants to go, and who can he put in there with relatively little friction in terms of them basically doing the day-to-day operations that the chief of staff requires. You shouldn't have to fight this person on a daily basis. Now, needless to say, if this person is offering you sound advice and you're not taking it, then firing that person or having them spend more time with their grandchildren or whatever the excuse of the day is going to come back and bite you. So we won't know the truth of that until a little time has passed. By having General Kelly leave, we have to assume that there's some serious friction between General Kelly and President Trump. So the question is, has General Kelly been keeping Donald Trump out of even more hot water, generated largely by the press, or is General Kelly digging in his heels and making it difficult for the president to execute the agenda he thinks he should be executing?
So what's the difference between the kind of candidate for the chief of staff post that you're suggesting and what might be popularly referred to as a yes man?
I have tried to be as honest about Donald Trump as I can be. I've said on several occasions that he is the only candidate that could have won because he fights and because he's a fighter and because he's a big ego in the same way that Obama and Kanye West are and all the rest. I begin to wonder if anybody other than a yes man would be able to do that job. Now, look, I prefaced what I'm about to say because I don't think I'm the first commentator to point out that Donald Trump has some flaws as president. I think having a yes man as a chief of staff is a dangerous, very dangerous position to find yourself in. However, that may be the only solution that has enough grease to slide down the rails. He does not seem to be the kind of person who looks for, solicits, or otherwise entertains contrary opinions so that he can, balance these out in his mind. In this whole, was it a cabinet of what was that, the Lincoln, the book about the Lincoln
cabinet of rivals, you're saying?
Yeah, cabinet of rivals. Yeah, I don't think Donald Trump is made out of the same stuff as Abraham Lincoln. I like to think personally that I would personally want to have at least a few close, trusted advisors who were capable of telling me, Mr. President, you're about to make a very, very big mistake. Please don't do this, sir. Here's why I think this is a big mistake. And I think that kind of leadership, that kind of confidence, and at the same time the willingness to admit that you might be wrong, or the willingness to accept the fact that perhaps your pride has gotten the better of you, I think that's the sign of maturity and humility and poise. And I don't think Donald Trump has just tons and tons and tons of those qualities. So if it turns out that a strong hand at the till is not going to work, then maybe what this president who's so sure of himself needs is somebody who will simply execute the directions he's given as efficiently and as trouble-free as possible.
There's I've read a lot of business books over the years, and we hired this president, so to speak. At least early on, the pitch was he's a business person. He's a successful business leader, and we need that kind of a person in Washington, D.C., because these people in D.C. don't know anything about business. They don't know how to run an organization. They are not leaders. And what I've seen in my reading is that you can be a jerk like Steve Jobs, as long as your organization is engaged in significant work and that people in that organization feel that they are an integral part in achieving that significant work. I'm not seeing the same kind of trend with President Trump. I'm just seeing sort of the jerk side of Steve Jobs without the gorgeous iPad coming out of it. Am I misreading this?
I see two Supreme Court justices. I see the disappearance of ISIS in essentially a week after he decided to get serious about all of this. I see progress on nuclear talks with North Korea. I see Iran no longer getting pallets of cash so they can make explosives to kill Americans and Israelis with. I see any number of beautiful iPads coming out of the Trump White House.
So I didn't state that analogy very well.
Among all of those, I see an economic growth that has been long suppressed by a person who's had some experience running a business and understands that the best way to generate wealth is to make the wealth generators have it in their interest to generate wealth. So I see lots and lots of shiny gadgets coming out of this Steve Jobs type person.
So why are people bailing on him when with Steve Jobs, most people stayed with him for a long, long time and were glad when he came back, even though they thought he was a jerk? Why are so many top leaders bailing on President Trump?
I got to tell you, Scott, I'd love to tell you that I could paint this with sunshine and say it's a swell thing. But for instance, losing Nikki Haley is just devastating. It's just really alarming, and that's my absolute honest take on it. When I see good people like this coming and going, it does in fact generate more doubts for me than just about any other thing than any anti-Trump story that the media might project. There's some extremely high quality people that have come and gone, and some not so high quality people. But I think one of the things that we need to remind ourselves as citizens who may be concerned about these kind of things is Donald Trump had a catchphrase. He's the only president that I'm aware of in history that actually had a catchphrase prior to getting into politics. Obama's was hope and change. And do you remember what Donald Trump is famous for saying?
You're fired.
There you go. That's who we elected. We elected the "you're fired" guy, and Donald Trump got the role on the Apprentice because it is in his nature to be it's in his nature to be quite of limited patience with people not doing the job the way he wants them to do it. And I would say, I don't want to say he takes delight in firing people, but at the very least, he's not shy about it.
Well, that's an interesting insight, Bill, because the ultimate point of that show was Donald Trump's ability to find a great leader, and then people got fired along the way. But in the popular culture, nobody remembered the finding of the great leader. They all remembered the catchphrase.
Precisely correct. So Donald Trump is, if you want to look at it in that light, which I think is not a bad light to look at it in. I mean, he's come awful far for an idiot. For this is what they said about George Bush as well. It's like Donald Trump's just a clown. He's a buffoon. He's like, well, he's a clown and buffoon who became president of the United States of America, and that'd make two in a row if you're right. But obviously, there's something that this man does that is unmistakable, and all of the criticisms leveled against him, he just rented his name or his tower. Okay, but I go to Las Vegas and I don't see Kerry Tower, and I don't see Kerry Tower in New York, and I don't see I don't see any of that. So whatever he is doing, he's doing effectively. And I like what you said about the actual outcome of The Apprentice, because what Donald Trump was on The Apprentice, and hopefully what is happening here as president, is he is an exceedingly rapid force of natural selection. He's an apex predator that moves very, very quickly, and if you're not capable of adopting and excelling, then you're going to be culled from the herd rather more quickly than with somebody else.
I'm right now trying to conjure the example of the person who has been able to stay with him through what is, still relatively short tenure as president of the United States.
Years,
yeah. And it's not a long list of prominent people.
What I find interesting about that particular observation, which is a very good observation, is that the one person who has remained on the job since the beginning is the one person who I wanted to be on the job more than anybody, and that's Secretary of Defense, for the love of God,
Jim Mattis.
Thank you, Mattis.
Yes. Obviously the vice president is still there. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is still there. I don't know if Kellyanne Conway is officially on the staff, but she's certainly a spokesperson, and she stuck with him before she was involved in the campaign. But it takes a certain kind of person, doesn't it?
It does, and certainly, certainly the loss of people like Steve Bannon is not lamented by me or anybody else. I was exceedingly happy to see that staff change. Exceedingly happy. Part of, I think, the issue here is that politics and business are not only not the same thing, in many cases they're antithetical things in terms of how things get done. In business, as a private enterprise owned by an individual, you can simply come in and issue commands and they'll be followed, and if you don't like what's happening, you fire those people. Government is less authoritarian that way, especially our government, at least as it was designed, and that's appropriate. But Donald Trump is not, in any case that I've seen, exceeded his constitutional authority. It's not like he's firing congressmen. He is dealing with people on his personal staff that serve at the pleasure of the president, and it is certainly his prerogative to do that. Now the question is this an indication of a White House that is so chaotic that it can't make up its mind from 1 month to the other, or is this the management style of a person who has exceedingly little patience with people who are not doing a job that we hired for the way he wants it done?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Whittle is certainly doing the job you hired him for if you're a member at BillWhittle.com. Those members are paying $9.95 a month to be citizen producers here, not for something that they can get in terms of members-only content, although there certainly is that, but for what they can give by being able to share these kinds of conversations with the world. We're not afraid of any subject, and you'll see it here 5 days a week on Bill Whittle Now, as well as 5 episodes a week from Right Angle with Stephen Green, Bill Whittle, and myself, Scott Ott. We're grateful to those members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible. You can join them today. Just go to that website, BillWhittle.com, and click that subscribe link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.